My name is James Trost, and this is A2 Insight. Today's guest is Sharon McRill. Sharon, welcome to A2 Insight.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Well, we're very glad to have you here. We're going to talk to Sharon about the company she's founded called the Betty Brigade, as well as this book that she's written called Downsizing, the Silver Tsunami. But to begin, for our viewers, Sharon, let's learn a little bit more about you, where you grew up, your early family influences, and what your life was like up until you started the Betty Brigade.
Well, I don't talk much about this, so it's kind of interesting. I was born in Mount Clemens, Michigan, and my parents got divorced when I was 5, and I ended up, when my mom got remarried, I ended up moving to Linden, Michigan, and I went to Linden High School. So I went to Linden schools, and for those, if you're not familiar with Linden, it's kind of a non-integrated community. There is not a lot of diversity there. There's more now, but there wasn't when I was growing up, and I couldn't wait to get out. It really just, it wasn't where I wanted to be, and that I wasn't brought up that way. Yeah, it just it never felt like home.
And so when you decided to get out, where did you go?
Well, first of all, I moved to Flint, and I went to University of Michigan Flint for a couple of years to get some basics under my belt, and then I got transferred on a job transfer to Washington, D.C. And so that was really fun, and I didn't know a single person in Washington, D.C. It was scary, but really exciting.
And then after Washington, what happens?
So I spent 3 years in Washington. I'm still friends with many people who live there, and I miss that city. It's a nice place to live. Yeah, nice place to live. But anyway, I moved back here. I moved to Ann Arbor, and I transferred my credits from University of Michigan Flint to Ann Arbor, and finished my degree because I was about halfway through.
And what degree did you get?
I got a degree in general studies, and the concentrations were film video, English, and women's studies. And mainly I got that degree because I couldn't pass French.
All right, well, there's nothing wrong with that being a motivation to get any degree. So what did you do with your Bachelor's of General Studies from the University of Michigan after you graduated?
Well, I'd been working in restaurants around Ann Arbor for years, and I actually still really love, being in front of people, and it helped me. I didn't know it, but my restaurant work has really helped me assess people. So when I meet someone, that's what waiters and waitresses do, is they're kind of sizing you up, and they're also serving you, but that's part of it, and I learned a lot about that when I was working in restaurants. But I left the restaurant world because I needed a real job, and I went and worked at Borders Corporate.
Well, for those of you who don't know, Borders Bookstore was really quite at the cusp here in Ann Arbor as a local chain that ended up being quite national and did well for a while. And then, like, unfortunately, many bookstores with the changes in the industries and the technology didn't make it. So what happened to you? Were you a victim of the demise of Borders, and what did you do next? Yeah,
so I started as an assistant to the buyers, helping them bring merchandise in and make sure that it got to stores on time. That was my job in the video department, and video and DVD was DVD was an emerging technology back then. So that was kind of exciting, and I still have an enormous DVD collection in my home. But that wasn't why I did it. It was a job. And then I ended up changing jobs within Borders, and I started working at Borders.com. And so I was writing content for the website and creating interviews. I got to do lots of celebrity interviews, which was really, really super fun.
And you can give us a few names of some of the celebrities you interviewed. But also, if you have any specific memories of something that was kind of interesting about that, any particular interview that kind of stands out to you as you look back on it.
Sure. A lot of the interviews stand out. I got to interview Tim Burton, who's one of my film heroes. I got to interview Sigourney Weaver. I got to interview Donald O'Connor, who was, you know, of course, older, and also Jane Russell, who was fascinating. She was telling stories about Marilyn Monroe, which was really, really cool. But one of the most memorable interviews is Robert England, the guy who played Freddy Krueger. And he he just stayed on the phone with me for an hour and a half. Like most interviews I would do were like 15, 20 minutes, and they would go on to their next interview. And he just wanted to talk and talk and talk and talk, and it was kind of hilarious.
Well, his role as Freddy Krueger kind of immortalized him over the course of several Friday the 13th, I think it was, videos.
Yeah.
All right, well then, we've been at Borders, and as I said, changes in technology and everything else. You were you willing? Did you willingly leave Borders, or what happens next?
Well, I love doing interviews and watching movies for a living. That was a fun job, and so what ended up happening is that Borders sold the website, borders.com, to Amazon. And me and about 70 people all lost our jobs at once. So we were part of an early round of layoffs at Borders. And so that was sad.
But you recovered, and then you decided to venture out in your own entrepreneurial endeavor and begin the Betty Brigade. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So what exactly is the Betty Brigade, and what service does it perform to the public?
Well, the Betty Brigade is an organizing and relocation service. And we kind of look at, when we're working with our clients, our homeowners, we're looking at the job as kind of like project management. We are not only figuring out what vendors you need to have inside that project, painters, cleaners, landscapers, a dumpster, like donation services, what do you need? But we're also looking at what Betty Brigade will do, because we're not just consultants. We are actually managing your project. We are in your house helping you choose the things that you want to keep, the things that are important to you, and packing those things up, and coordinating your relocation, getting you quotes from movers and things like that, and bringing in estate sale services and consignment dealers and antique dealers, and whatever kind of service that you might need to sell your stuff and put money back in your pocket.
Now, so the key is, when we're going to be talking about your book, Downsizing, the Silver Tsunami, the key is someone's contacting you. I assume the assumption would also be that maybe selling their home. Now, do you market directly? Do you go through real estate agencies? How do you get the word of the Betty Brigade out there? How do you promote it to the public in this area?
Well, we don't do any kind of traditional advertising. All of our marketing is word of mouth. And so we've been doing that for 16 years. And primarily, we work with real estate agents. We work with financial advisors, we work with CPAs, and we work with trust groups, which are the groups at banks that manage people's estates. And so we work with those kind of entities, and they are often referring us to their clients.
Now then, if in this situation, we'll take an example of somebody who has a home, let's say somewhere in Ann Arbor. The mother has just died, the children are dealing with the whole horror of that, and then the house is there and all the things that mother's accumulated over 50 years, and either the agency or someone's contacted your organization, and then you're consulting with the family then, or you consult, I mean, who actually is hiring you in most instances?
The family hires us.
Okay, the family does hire you.
Yep.
And then do you then, let's say this family then decides we want to have an estate sale. Do you hire the estates? How do you get into that? Additional vendors, how do you deal with that?
So that's actually a great question, because we get asked this all the time. We probably get 3 or 4 calls a week saying, could you recommend an estate seller? And I'm just going to say that not all estate sellers are created equally. There are very high-end estate sellers, and there are, I don't want to call them low-end, but let's call them quantity estate sellers. So you wouldn't want someone who deals mainly with hoarders to come into a very high-end house that has museum quality stuff. They're not going to have the same audience. So what we try and do is match the stuff in the house to the estate seller so that they already have a built-in audience and that homeowner is getting more traffic on their sale.
So it's a variety based on what has been accumulated over the years,
Yes.
as to oppose the kind of person you want to, individual you want to work with. All right, well then let's lead to exactly, you've been doing this business for now 16, 17 years.
16,
And
yep.
16. Give us the impetus for when you wrote, you said you're not a writer, but you wrote when you were working, so you do write. So you wrote this book called Downsizing, the Silver Tsunami. What was the impetus for this, and what has been the reception of this book?
Well, we were really excited. It launched in February and it became an international #1 bestseller. So that was super cool, and we were thrilled about that. But the impetus was that we kept getting asked the same questions over and over again. And what we found is that while we move people every day, and movers move people every day, and realtors move people every day, the general public does not move every day. And so people don't know what the next step is. So I created a reference tool so that they would kind of understand, the average person who doesn't move regularly would kind of understand, here are the steps you need to go through. There's a timeline in the book. And some of the questions like hiring an estate seller and why you want to match your stuff with their audience and the stuff that they're already selling.
Well, and there's so many different facets to this as it relates to the emotions involved, the idea that we don't want, I don't want to leave my home that they may not be able to take care of. But then going back to the whole thing is with hoarders or people who tend to hold on to things maybe too long, how there's a psychological aspect to this, even from your services. How do you convince people to, the book uses this term, let go of things? And things mean a lot. Things are memories. Things are accumulated. Things may be more than all over the house, hoarders. And people don't want to say, how do you smile and say, maybe it's time to let go? It's not an easy thing, what you're being hired to do, to convince someone to maybe let go of things. How do you do that?
Well, it's shockingly hard to do. And there's a reason why families step back from doing this, because it is emotionally charged. And sometimes when people are working within the families, that creates a whole different dynamic, and we can talk about that later. But how letting go is sometimes just simply a logistical problem, like you can't fit a 5-bedroom house into a 2-bedroom apartment. It just won't work. There's no garage, or there's no basement, or things like that. And so the storage area significantly changes. So what we're really working with the client on is, what are the things that are most important, the things they absolutely need to live, but then the things that really bring them joy and help create that sense of home. That's important, that you feel comfortable in your new space, and you don't need everything. One of the examples I often will say to people is, what would you grab if there were a fire? You wouldn't grab your couch. I mean, no one would grab their couch. They would grab their pets, sometimes their pictures, sometimes a computer, things that are important to them. So think about it from that perspective.
So actually, in we are going to talk about this a little bit more in depth. But interestingly, from what you're saying, your role can actually be more helpful as even an intermediary between family and their aging parent. Because you have almost a professional distance. Because if this scenario, mom doesn't want to move, family want her out of the house, they want to sell the house, she doesn't think she can live anywhere else, and you're in the middle of that situation. How do you, that's not easy for you, is it?
Well, that comes up regularly. And so there's two sides to that equation, right? Mom who doesn't want to move, who's digging in her heels and saying, nope, I've lived here for 40+ years and I'm perfectly happy. And what we're looking at, is she safe? Is the space clutter-free? Is there trip hazards? Does she have what she needs? Does she need a stair lift or something to take her up and down the stairs so she can safely stay in her home? So we're looking at things like that. Or has there been some sort of physical or health problem that she can no longer stay there. Has that happened? So there's a negotiation there. And the kids are often saying, well, I can't be here all the time, and so I want my parent to be safe, and I don't feel like they're safe in their home anymore. And so it's both of them are coming from love, but it's different perspectives. And so sometimes we're saying to the kids, back off, let's give mom another 6 months in her house, and let's install some grab bars and a ramp. And then we also have to say to mom, okay, so you realize that your kids just want you to be safe. And if your health continues to deteriorate, then let's make that decision again in 6 months. But in the meantime, let's start clearing out the basement. Let's start clearing out the attic. Let's start looking at the garage, those places where stuff accumulates, and start to make that stuff move so that when the actual move date happens, whether it's planned or unplanned, the process is already underway.
Having parents and grandparents around during the 1930s, they didn't throw out anything. My grandparents, well, my grandpa collected stamps, but he also collected every envelope, every card, every letter, even cut off canceled postage stamps, and had this all over the house. Have you run into, and let's have a little bit more levity here, when you come into someone's house, and I mean there's a famous TV series called Hoarders that people are fascinated by, people who literally hold on to everything. Have you ever, what have been more humorous things you've found when you've looked into someone's house and say, well, maybe we want to take a look at getting some things away? There's got to be some things you've run across.
Oh, we've come across some really, really funny stuff. And some of it I can't talk about publicly because it's a little R-rated, but kind of hilarious. But we see the humanity of people. It's a lot like archaeology, what we do. And so sometimes we know more about people than their family does. We know more about the homeowner. So here's something that was really funny. We were in this guy's home, and he was selling some artwork. And he said, I don't need all this artwork. I'm ready to start letting some go. And I was in his office, and the door was, there was something behind the door, and he had already left, and I was still standing in his office, and there was this mannequin, and it had on a coat with a coat of arms on it, but it had a pink feather boa and sunglasses, and I just thought that was really, really funny to be in this very, very, conservative office and with very nice art, and then here's this mannequin with no pants and a coat and a feather boa. I just thought that was silly. And so there's lots of things that come up like that where we just find stuff. My team is it varies. They vary in age, so a lot of our younger employees don't know what some of the older stuff is. They don't know what a potato masher is, or things like that were used regularly in the 30s, 40s, and 50s.
Well, then maybe another thing would be, sometimes you hear about all the, I watched Antiques Roadshow, and people come to the show, Pawn Stars, has there some tour, and again, that would probably be more the estate sale in terms of value, but do you ever run across something that, wow, you wouldn't have expected to see that really, quite frankly, was very valuable in terms of items?
So we had a lady who, her boyfriend, longtime boyfriend, died, and he gifted her a Rembrandt. And so we walk into her house. She had a very modest condo, nice but modest, and sitting there on the table was a little pencil drawing that was a Rembrandt. And I was like, holy moly, I've never been this close to a real Rembrandt. And she said, well, I was just going to take it on the plane with me. And I said, no, you're not going to take this on the plane. And she goes, well, why? And I said, so say the person next to you stands up and spills their coffee on your Rembrandt. They're not making any more Rembrandts. You don't get to take that on the plane unless you buy a seat for it. And even then, I would still crate it. And sometimes people just don't even think of the value of what they have. They recognize it, but they don't always think of it.
Well, and that's where it's both not only the recognition of what may be externally valuable, but also what family members think is valuable. And for some family members, particularly siblings, there may be some items that they think they want, they both want, or they all want, and they are having a hard time deciding who gets it or who it was promised to. So one of the service or one of the recommendations you make in your book is that it's very important for parents as well as others to know exactly who is going to be getting items in case someone goes. So why does this happen a lot, and why do you think it happens?
This happens all the time, and it's mainly because people don't plan. And so we really, there's a whole chapter in the book on having a trust. Why it's important to have a trust. And this happened in my own family. I had to talk to my dad and say, all right, Dad, you need a trust. And he said, well, I don't have that much. I have a couple cars and a house. And I said, yeah, but it will still end up going to probate court. Probate court is where things go when there is not a will in place and people think that it will just naturally be divided. And so I am not an attorney. I am not a financial advisor, but I see that families get into problems with this. I would say probably 50% of the work that we do, people do not, there hasn't been planning in place, and there's no trust. And a trust meaning a formal document. And it's not expensive to have a trust put in place. Can I give you an example?
Sure.
So one that's in the news right now is Aretha Franklin. So Aretha Franklin, her attorney tried for years to get her to sign a trust document, and she refused. And there are still 3 wills out there that are being debated in court. Now, when you have the kind of wealth that Aretha Franklin had, what's happening is that $11 million of her estate, or thereabouts, is going to probate court. Now imagine what $11 million could have changed in this world for nonprofits, even for 11 nonprofits, for 22 nonprofits. I mean, like, $11 million is a heck of a lot of money, and that could have been changed with a signature from her. And I'm not implying that the watchers of this show have that kind of money, but what I'm saying is that when there's planning in place, when people take that extra step to have a trust, not a will, because a will can still go to probate, but a trust that protects the assets of that property, and people don't have to go to court while they're grieving, because you're already dealing with enough chaos of the loss of that parent or loved one, and then you have to go to court and figure it out. That sounds horrible.
So that's interesting. So you're basically saying the trust saves you from the probate.
Yes, it does.
I don't think many people are aware of that. I would assume most attorneys would prefer you deal with. I mean, you can have an attorney set up a trust, but the trust could include things like what people are going to get.
Oh, absolutely.
And then by having the trust, you could possibly avoid probate.
You can absolutely avoid probate unless someone, but even contesting the trust is much less likely because it has been written down and signed and notarized, and an attorney has crafted a document. So it's much less likely that there will be debate around a trust. And that being said, of course there are exceptions, and again,
sure.
I am not an attorney, but what we see is that when things are in trust, things go much smoother, the family is much less likely to fight, and everything gets handled in a more professional way.
Well, that's, I think a lot of us think of a trust as specifically a financial thing. I didn't realize that. But again, this is something, we're getting advice for folks to deal with this, and I'm learning stuff about it too. One of the things, and I just want to, you keep saying the most important thing for people to do is plan, and I think for some people, well, I'm not going anywhere. You know, I'm going to be around forever. I don't need a will. I don't need to think about this.
We're all going to die.
Or there are the attitude that, well, you know, I don't have to deal with it. I don't want to, you know, I don't want to think about this. It's too morbid. You know, I'm not going to die, and I don't want to. And my kids will work it out. It's hard. It's an emotional thing. It is a reality. But then I guess that would lead to someone who is getting up there in years, maybe a couple, maybe a single person, anyone, And they're not in a situation where they're in any immediate thought of moving to a smaller home or anything else within the foreseeable future, but they are thinking about downsizing and they want to be proactive. So what would you say to somebody who knows this is in the back of their mind, not inevitable, it's not a sudden thing that's thrust on them? What would you say, well, what would you do, or what have you done to plan for these inevitabilities in advance to avoid some of the horrors of family squabblings and everything else?
Well, so my husband and I do have a trust, and I also talked to my dad about creating a trust so that we don't have to go to court. And this is what he said. My dad said to me, "Oh, you and your brother will figure this out. I won't be around anyway." So that's what you were implying. And I said, "Dad, we are going to be grieving, and we are going to be dispersing your home. Like, that just adds another level of stress. Why would you do that to us?" And so that's what I say to my clients. Why would you do that to your kids? It's important that people plan, and if you want something better, then you plan for it. And it's as simple as that. And estate attorneys, there are hundreds of them. You can Google estate attorney Ann Arbor, and you will get a whole list of them. And we work with lots of them too. And they're terrific people. They're not about money grubbing. They want to make sure that everything flows smoothly and that it's done the way that you want it to be done after you pass, and that your family doesn't have the stress that they don't need.
And that would be your recommendation, that given your experience, that folks, this is something that's important to avoid the stress. And without specifics, this can ruin families.
I have seen it ruin families up close.
And what is it that they didn't do that you say, please remember this before it's too late? It ended up in probate, and so the house ended up being in court for years. And the family was still fighting over the property of the house, and nothing can be dispersed when things are in probate. And so somebody has to keep paying the taxes and the insurance and the utilities, and then often that house is not occupied, so it's deteriorating. So the property value then drops, and all of this stuff is happening while people are fighting in court. It doesn't need to happen that way. It really doesn't. What's next for you? Are you going to? You've been doing this now for 16 years. You've written a book. You've been very successful in terms of your reputation in the community. And wouldn't we all love to have a business that's only run by word of mouth? Not bad. Where do you hope to take? Where do you hope to lead the Betty Brigade in the next 5 years? Do you have anything new on the horizon? Anything innovatively you want to do within the confines of that? You want to write more books? What's on the agenda for Sharon McRill in the coming 5 years?
Well, a lot is on my agenda. I'm a planner. I like to plan. You might have guessed that. You might have guessed that about me. And so we currently, Betty Brigade currently covers all of Michigan. And so we've been doing that for about 5 years. And we're starting to branch outside of Michigan. So when people have, say, a home here in Southeast Michigan, and maybe they've got a house in Florida, we can do both homes. And so that's kind of where we're going, and we're basing that around our corporate relationships that we already have in place. So we're not just willy-nilly saying, well, we want to be in this city. It's based around where we already have business coming in. So it's all done very strategically. And so that is our expansion plan.
And how many employees do you currently have?
I currently have 16. I need some more. So if you think that this kind of, or if you know somebody that you think this job is like, ooh, that's exciting, I'd like to do that, you have to be good at juggling things and managing lots of information and good with logistics. You have to not mind getting dirty because we work in basements and attics and garages. And you have to be great with people.
All right, well, those are the qualifications. Susan McRill is the author of Downsizing, The Silver Tsunami, Who to Call and Where Does the Stuff Go, and also the founder of the Betty Brigade. Susan McRill, thank you very much for being on A2 Insight today.
Well, thank you. It
very
was
glad
really a pleasure.
Well, thank you. And until next time, for A2 Insight, I'm James Trost.